The cottage at the marsh line had no neighbors and no roads, only a footpath the wind erased every week. Mara liked it that way. Silence had rules. Silence didn't ask why she never went to town, or why she kept 2 locks on the cellar and a bell on the back door. She mended nets for fishermen who never met her, left them on stumps for coin, and read by lamplight until the wick hissed out. In winter she patched the roof with driftwood. In summer she stacked peat bricks and lavender bundles. People in the valley had stopped speaking her name long ago. The marsh, at least, never asked for anything but patience. Then, on a rain-bitten night when clouds pressed low like a second ceiling, someone knocked. Not the timid tapping of lost travelers. 3 weighty blows that made the cups shiver on their hooks. Mara's heart struck once, hard. No one came this far after dark. She tightened her shawl, took up the iron hook she used to lift kettles, and went to the door. "Who is it?" Wind answered, dragging reeds across the porch. Then a voice, ruined and low. "Open." The word felt older than the marsh. She nearly turned the latch the wrong way. When she pulled, the world spilled in, rain, cold, and a man too tall for the frame, swaying, his coat black with wet and darker with blood. He caught the threshold with one hand and left a smear there like burnt wine. His face was a study in contrasts, pale as moonbone, mouth split with a cut, eyes the color of banked coals. Not red. Not yet. "Please," he said, and gravity finished what the storm began. He fell forward. Mara threw the door wide and took half his weight. It felt like shouldering a felled tree. He slid to the planked floor and lay there, breath thin, rain ticking from his hair. The stories that sent valley children scurrying behind shutters rose like crows in her mind. Do not invite the night through the door. Do not meet the gaze that glows. Do not count a dead thing's breaths. She should drag him back into the rain and bolt the house. Instead she dropped to her knees and pressed her palm to his throat. A pulse, wrong fast and strong. Heat under cold. Her kettle hook clanged as it slipped from her grip. "Just let me rest," he whispered, as if he knew the exact price of the request. A moment. It was an impossible moment to grant. But denial felt crueler than risk. Mara shifted his head into her lap, pulled the door with her heel, and the storm became a dull roar instead of a blade. Up close, the wound that ruined his shirt wasn't a wound so much as a map, 4 parallel rakes across the ribs, as if a bear had changed its mind mid-kill. The edges already knitted and unknitted under her gaze, like a stitch that refused to hold. Not human. Not close. She took the knife she used for peat twine, slit his shirt cleanly, and wrapped him with the last of her linen. He didn't flinch. His eyes drifted, then caught hers, and for a breath Mara felt seen the way a shoreline is seen by a storm, intimately, inevitably, without judgment. "Don't be afraid," he said. The corner of his mouth tipped, tired wry. "If I meant you harm, I would have knocked with fire." "You're bleeding on my floor," Mara said, because humor sometimes holds the gate shut when terror rattles it. He exhaled what might have been a laugh and let his eyes go dark. She blew out the lamp to spare the oil and let the hearth paint the room in low amber. Rain crawled over the shingles. The marsh sighed. His weight in her lap grew heavier as muscles unthreaded tension. Monsters don't sleep, she thought. Then his breath evened, and the monster slept. She did not sleep. She stroked damp hair from his forehead and counted breaths until the count became a prayer without words. When dawn came gray and reluctant, she eased his head onto a folded shawl and flexed her numb legs. The cottage looked small around him, as if he bent the shape of space. She cleaned the knife, washed the floorboards, stoked the fire, all the chores a body performs when its mind is circling the same question: why her door? The answer arrived before she could ask it, in the subtle way birds go silent. The marsh held its breath. The bell on the back door rang once. No wind, no reason. Mara pivoted, already reaching for the iron. The bell rang again, then tore free with a scream of wire. The back door did not open. It exploded inward. 3 figures spilled across the threshold, wrapped in oiled cloaks, eyes bright with a hunter's cold arithmetic. They did not look at the sleeping stranger first. They looked at Mara, assessed her, and dismissed her with a flick of a lip. "Move!" the first one said, silver-tipped bolt knocked and certain. "We've come for the Night Regent." The name hit her like standing water in winter, shock first, then a pain that nearly felt hot. Regent. Kings do not knock, regents do, perhaps, when kingship is contested. On the floor, the man rolled to his elbow, confusion burning away like fog in sun. In one breath he was prey, in the next he was the thing that makes prey forget to run. He rose with the kind of grace that spends centuries sharpening itself. The bolt sang. He was between her and it before her flinch had finished, letting the dart stitch his shoulder instead of her heart. The second hunter charged. The stranger met him like a door made of midnight, one step, one shrug, and the man folded. The third set fire to a palmful of powder and blew it. The room flared silver-white. Mara's vision went to embers. Hands caught her, dragged her toward the ruined door. She swung the kettle hook on instinct. It cracked teeth and bought her air. "Porch," the regent said, voice steady despite the bolt jutting from muscle. "Now." She didn't think, she obeyed. Out under rain, the porch boards screamed as two bodies hit them, tangled. The marsh took the sound and hid it. After the hunters were gone. One limping into reeds, one not moving at all, one a smear of footprints headed for higher ground. The silver smoke thinned to the ordinary kind that rises from wet wood. The regent, if that was a name and not a legend sewn into him, leaned against the doorframe and snapped the bolt in half. The hiss between his teeth admitted to pain his mouth denied. "You brought them to me," Mara said, not sure if blame or awe sat heavier in the words. "No," he said, eyes settling on her with a weight that felt like a pledge. "I brought them away from where they would have looked first. The valley. The fishermen. The small lives that had left coin on stumps and never asked for thanks." Her jaw changed. "You'll leave," she said. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't a plan. It was the only way the equation balanced. "At dusk," he answered, as if dusk belonged to him. "If I can stand. If you can forgive me another hour on your floor." His candor disarmed her. "Nay," she said. "If I'm washing your blood out of my boards, I should know what to call it." "Lucian," he said. "Mara," she returned. "You're safe here until dusk, Lucian. After that, you're a rumor again." For a time the day behaved. She boiled water and steeped marsh mint for shock, handed him a cup with both hands so the tremble wouldn't show. He cradled it like a winter gift and sipped slow. His eyes cooled from ember to iron. She dressed the bolt wound and pretended not to notice how the skin tried to spit the metal out. "Who clawed you?" she asked finally, nodding at the ribs where linen met a map. "Not a bear." "Family," he said, and the word held no softness at all. "They do not like that I prefer treaties to harvests." "Treaties get you shot," Mara said. "Harvests get you torches," he returned, a dry ledger in a single sentence. Outside, the marsh reheard its song. A heron stepped through the reeds as if nothing on the earth could hurry it. Mara tucked hair behind her ear and leaned on the table, caught by a stupid, ordinary thought. He looks tired. Not mortal tired. Fortress tired. "You can sleep again," she said, careful with it, like handing a blade back by the hilt. His mouth made a shape almost like surprise. He nodded, lowered himself to the rug, and laid his head where it had been, her lap, the first country he'd ceded. He slept as if answering a debt. The house remapped itself around the rhythm of it, around the small sounds men do not allow out of their mouths when they are observed. Rain dimmed to a whisper. The marsh exhaled. Mara traced the line of the bolt through muscle with her eyes and kept her hands still. She tried to inventory her fear and found it fox-quick and difficult to hold. It wasn't just him she feared. It was the way his presence tugged at her isolation like tied at a rope. She had chosen absence and called it peace. He made the word feel thinner than it had yesterday. At some point his fingers shifted against the hem of her skirt, not grasping, only grounding. The gesture stole heat into her face she hadn't felt in years. Don't make it mean more than it does, she told herself, and knew it already meant more than she'd allowed anything to mean in a decade. When he woke, dusk had burned a copper edge across the windows. He blinked like someone returning from far inland. I kept you alive, she said, trying for flint. He tilted his head. You kept me human, he said, and the words sat in the room like an unexpected guest. Dusk is a liar's hour. It promises cover and delivers silhouette. Mara packed a satchel anyway, salve, flint, 2 hand pies wrapped in oiled cloth, and set it on the table without comment. You won't come back this way, she said. If you do, you'll bring more trouble than a house can hold. Lucian rolled his sleeve to test the arm. The wound looked like a river after flood, wider than it had been, calmer than it should be. I owe you a debt, he said. I don't collect, she answered. Then I'll leave it on your step the way fishermen leave coin, he said, and something almost like a smile unbarred itself. He reached for the satchel. His hand stopped halfway, hovering, uncertain for the first time. Why did you open the door? He asked it softly, as if he genuinely did not understand. Mara looked past him to the marsh, where gnats made the last daylight visible. Because I used to dream someone would knock on mine, she said. And because I've learned that saving a thing is not the same as keeping it. He nodded like a man taking a vow. If they come again, he said, they will not come as men. Family? She asked. Worse, he said. Those who think law is hunger wearing a crown. They didn't wait for full night. The first sign was not a sound but an absence, no frogs. The marsh went coin-flat and still. Lucian straightened as if strings lifted him. Inside, he said. Cellar. Mara shook her head. Cellars for storms, not wars. She set her palm to the doorpost, another to the table, and felt the cottage the way you feel a body that has carried you, where it will flex, where it will break. I'm not hiding in my own bones. He looked at her as if the sentence had moved something he thought immovable. Then behind me, he said, softer now. The first of them came through the reeds like ink spilled in water, 5, then 7, then the count failed. Not hunters. Not men. Eyes like lamps set too far back in a cave, smiles that had learned their shapes from knives. The lead figure lifted 2 fingers in greeting that was also a threat. Brother, she said to Lucian, and the word carried 3 centuries of contempt. You sleep in mud and call it mercy. Lucian didn't look away. I call it a truce, he said. You call everything a menu. Mara found the iron hook in her hand without remembering picking it up. The cottage breathed with her. When the first step crossed the threshold, she swung. The iron hook met a forearm with a sound like striking a bell underwater. The intruder hissed, the skin there smoked where iron kissed it. Lucian moved at the same breath, an eclipsing shadow, intercepting 2 more before their feet cleared the threshold. The cottage turned battlefield in a heartbeat, tables skidding, lamp chimney shattering, peat bricks tumbling from the hearth like small comets. Out! The sister snarled, as if the house offended her. Drag him into open ground. No, Mara said, to no one and to everything. She planted herself where the lintel made a narrow choke and swung again. Iron rang, the intruder reeled. Lucian's hand braced the doorframe, and his other hand became a sentence written in claws. One body folded as if a string had been cut. Another slipped past, teeth bright. Mara thrust the hook like a spear. It caught the thing in the shoulder and pinned cloth to jam. For a blink the creature stared at her with the affront of a noble stabbed by a spoon. Lucian tore it away before it could retaliate, then leaned close enough that she felt the cold of him. You aim where it matters, he said, the praise as spare and startling as lightning. Stay at my left. I'll keep you. The sister did not enter. She paced the edge of the porch like a commander measuring a siege. You could have been a dynasty, she called, rain stippling her hair into a crown of needles. But you chose to be a shepherd. I chose to be a door, Lucian answered, and Mara felt the truth of it vibrate through the frame beneath her hands. More bodies pressed, a tide that suddenly wanted this room as if the smallness of it insulted them. Small rooms make equalizers. Only two can stand abreast. Only one can leap. Mara learned the rhythm quickly. Lucian strikes, she spoils. Lucian faints, she drags a wrist down on iron. Lucian stumbles, she shoulders him the way she has shouldered boats from mud. When the tide broke back to regroup, the cottage looked like a diagram of violence. Gouges in the table, slashed linen, a line of ash across the floor where a body had failed to remember itself. "They'll fire the marsh," Mara panted. "They won't," Lucian said, eyes cutting to the reeds. "They've forgotten what water can do to flame." The sister smiled, hearing him without needing ears. She clicked her tongue. Two of hers hauled out oilskin bladders. "Remind me," she said, and cut them open with a dainty nail. Oil found water, spread, gleamed, took the storm's mood for its own. A single coal from the hearth could make a necklace of fire around the cottage if the wind agreed. Lucian's gaze slid to the embers, to Mara, to the rain. "Trust me," he said, and stepped into the doorway full. He did not leap. He spoke. The word was not in the valley's language or the marshes. It was older than the bell rope and the bolt and the idea of doors. It sounded like stone deciding to remain a mountain. The marsh listened. Wind changed its mind. Rain thickened from sheet to braid, ropes of water slamming oil with the force of thrown nets. The first match shrieked and died. The sister's smile thinned. "You're tired," she said, and it was not a taunt, it was accounting. He did not deny it. Mara felt a separate answer waking in her, quiet, bright, like a wick taking flame from another candle's end. She looked down at the iron hook in her grip, at her own skin beaded with rain, and thought of all the times she had asked this house to hold against weather and time. "With me," she said to the cottage. "One more night." That was when the bell that had been torn away rang once where it lay in the reeds, as if agreeing. The next breach was not through wood but through sense. A figure crossed the threshold without crossing distance, here not here, a blur that made the eye decide to lie. It reached for Mara's throat with a hand that looked like a length of winter. Lucian wasn't there. He was 2 angles away, dueling the sister's lieutenant. Mara did not step back. She stepped in. Sometimes you go toward the wave so it breaks over you where you can still plant your feet. She jammed the iron into the intruder's wrist and felt a pop like an egg cracking. The thing made a thin, furious sound and reassembled its hand with a showy little twitch. "Pet," it said to annoy Lucian if he heard. "Tool," Mara returned, and slammed the hook down again. This time when it lifted the wrist, the skin stuck to iron like caramel to a pan. It tore itself free and left part of itself behind. The scream made the porch lamps in Mara's memory flicker. Even recollections disliked the noise. Lucian finished the lieutenant with a final, elegant ruin of a gesture and came back to her with shoulders squared. For a moment they stood shoulder to shoulder, breath braided, the cottage at their backs like a third fighter. "They won't stop," he said. "Then we don't either," she said, and the pair of sentences fit as if they'd been waiting for each other. Enough. The sister's patience, which had been a winter river, deep, slow, implacable, went to ice cracking. She stepped onto the threshold. The house disliked her immediately. Mara felt it in the boards. "Give him to me," the sister said, as if asking for a book borrowed too long. Lucian's face changed in a way that made Mara understand history without learning it. This woman had taught him the shape of hunger, and then sold him a mirror. "By what law?" he asked. "By the law that keeps our name in the mouths of cities," she said, eyes like coins no one could spend. "By the law we were made to serve, ours." "Then hear mine," Mara said, and surprised herself. "A house is sovereign. A threshold is a treaty. You'll not cross mine with command in your mouth." The sister's gaze swung to her, amused. "You mistake your plank for a throne. You mistake your crown for a door," Mara said, because courage often arrives wearing the clothes of exhaustion. The sister lifted her hand. The air pulled tight. Lucian moved first, because he always would. The strike that followed wasn't beautiful. It was work. He took her wrist and turned it the way fishermen turn stubborn corks. Bones spoke. The sister hissed, stepped back, and for the first time considered retreat like a person considering a second road. Retreat came with attacks. She whistled, a note that stitched the reeds shut and told every creature with red in its eye to do the unlovely thing at once. 4 remaining kin surged. Lucian met 2, and the world narrowed to the sound of bodies choosing to break. The third slashed past him toward Mara with a blade thin as a thought. She did the thing you only do if you have lived alone long enough to make all your own rules. She took the cut on the outside of her forearm to save her throat, grabbed the blade with her other hand where rain and blood made it slick, and wrenched. Iron sang and snapped, cheap steel dressed in menace. The creature blinked, offended by reality. Mara shoved the broken half through its collar, and it registered the lesson too late. The fourth vaulted high, aiming to come down on Lucian's spine. Left! Mara shouted, and threw the hook end over end. It spun like a small moon and caught the jumper mid-arc, dragging him into a beam. Wood and Bone voiced their objections in chorus. For 3 seconds, nothing moved but rain. Then Lucian laughed once, quick, delighted, incredulous. The sound made the marsh remember birdsong, even here. They should have died then and did not, which is its own kind of treaty with the night. The sister stood in the doorway's mouth and studied the math. Behind her the reeds lifted, showing the long brightness of the valley road, distant torches, not hers, bobbing toward the marsh. Hunters or villagers, it hardly mattered. Witnesses turn fights into stories you can't manage. This grows tedious, she said, flexing the wrist he turned. Keep your shepherd's crown, brother. I'll take the flock. She pointed out into the dark, a gesture that gathered consequence the way skirts gather burrs. Lucian's jaw locked. You will not touch them. You cannot be 2 places, she replied, and stepped backward into rain that made a curtain around her. Choose. It was the first true cruelty of the night. Lucian's eyes slid to Mara. He didn't have to ask. She had already packed the answer. Go, she said, pushing the satchel into his hands. Stop the fire where it hasn't lit yet. They will come back through you, he said. Then leave something of you here, she said, breath quick, words reckless and right. Not crown. Not command. Leave a promise. He lifted his hand to her face and did not touch, and still it felt like a vow. Threshold, he said, voice gone low. Sovereign. Regent, she returned. Door. He turned and was gone, a dark thought racing ahead of a bad idea. Alone with kin is a different loneliness than alone with silence. The cottage breathed shallowly, as if saving air. Mara reset the table on its legs, doused the last ember to deny the sister smoke, and wrapped her bleeding forearm in a strip torn from the curtain that had never been pretty. She had 1 minute, 2 if rain argued on her behalf. She walked the perimeter of the room, palm on plaster, on timber, on nail. Hold, she whispered, and something in the house listened the way old dogs do, half from love, half from habit. The first kin to test the threshold smirked as if over a parlor trick. It set its foot where so many boots had set before, and the plank shifted wrong on purpose. The creature's ankle rolled with a wet little cluck. It yelped, and Mara did not waste the lesson. She gave it the iron the way a bell gives sound. It fell backward into rain, too surprised to be angry. The next tried the wall, thinking speed could invent a door. The plaster bowed, then snapped back and slung the body out like a fisherman slinging a fish he's not licensed to keep. Good house, Mara said, and laughed once, high and breathless. Just this night, old bones. Then rest. Out in the marsh, shouts, human ones, stitched themselves into the weather. Lucian's voice carried under them like a drum you feel through your feet. He was doing what she could not, being large enough to scare a story out of ending badly. The sister's shape flickered along the reed line, impatient and precise, counting. She hated counting, she wanted claiming. Last offer, she called. Trade yourself for them. Last offer, Mara called back, surprised by how even she sounded. Trade your name for peace. Leave the valley. Leave me. Leave him. I will take him for interest later. the sister said, sweet as poison sent by post. She lifted her hand again, and this time she did not point at the door or the marsh. She pointed at Mara's chest, a child's gesture with an adult's malice. Heat pressed against bone like someone trying to warm their hands at her sternum. Mara remembered the sensation from a very different winter, panic. No, she said, and put her own hand flat to her breastbone, palm to skin, as if stopping a door. The wick-bright feeling from earlier flared, small, stubborn. She didn't make it bigger. She made it steadier, and steadiness has always been stronger than size. Lucian returned like weather breaks, sudden and absolute. He didn't burst through the door. He appeared in its negative space, rain slick on his hair, blood rinsed to pink on his sleeve, eyes bright enough to make the sister's smile close like a trap embarrassed by failing. Behind him, the torches on the road guttered out, each snuffed as if pinched by giant fingers. Choose again, he said to his sister, voice gone very civil. Go home while there is one. You cannot keep both your pet and your pity. She answered, almost tired now, as if the arithmetic had disappointed her. Watch me, he said. He stepped fully back over the sill, beside Mara, both of them framed by a house that had decided it was a throat no wolf would pass. She felt his arm brush hers, light as an oath tied with string. He did not look down. He did not need to. This threshold, he said, names us. He lifted his chin to the storm. Mine! A pulse went through wood and reed and water, a low yes that did not ask permission of the air. The sister felt it, stepped back once, measuring the cost of stubbornness, and, for tonight, paid with retreat. She melted into rain. The remaining kin dissolved like bad dreams upon waking. The marsh exhaled. The bell, fallen in the reeds, rang once more, small and satisfied. Mara let herself lean, just a little, into the man who had knocked and slept and stayed. You left a promise, she said, smiling despite blood and ruin. I meant to, he said. I think it left me. The rain thinned, though the sky stayed iron-gray. Mara stood with her back to the cottage wall, her knees shaking now that the fight was finished. Lucian hadn't moved since he'd stepped back across the threshold. He watched the reeds, his jaw hard, his eyes still bright enough to sting if she looked too long. She wanted to ask if they were safe, but the word felt dishonest. Safe didn't exist anymore. They'll come again, she whispered. He nodded once. They always do. He turned then, slow, deliberate, as if shifting his gaze from the marsh to her cost him more than claws or arrows had. But when they do, they won't find you alone. His words should have scared her more than the night itself. Instead, she felt the strangest relief, like something deep inside her had stopped waiting for the sound of a knock. Mara exhaled, a shaky laugh spilling out without her permission. Then we had better start mending walls, she said. Lucian blinked at her, and something softened in his expression, so brief it might have been an accident. But for Mara it was enough. By morning, the marsh smelled of smoke and iron. No bodies remained, only stains where ash had washed into the water. Mara patched the door with planks torn from an old chest, her stitches uneven but stubborn. Lucian watched from the hearth, his shirt discarded, wounds already sealing into pale scars. She should have felt unnerved at how quickly he healed. Instead, she found herself staring at the marks that hadn't faded, ancient scars, old wars written on his skin. Why here? She asked at last, driving the awl through wood with more force than needed. Why my door? He didn't look away. Because no one else would open it. The answer struck like a nail hammered straight through her chest. She swallowed, throat tight. You make it sound like I chose wrong. His mouth tilted. No. You chose true. Mara pressed her lips together and focused on the wood. If she looked at him too long, she feared the house would stop feeling like hers. The day wore long and quiet. Lucian spoke little, but his silence was different from hers. Mara had lived with silence like an extra shadow. His was heavy-edged, a weapon at rest. She found herself speaking just to fill it, telling him of her garden, the stubborn reeds she battled each spring, the fox that stole her eggs last autumn. He listened, not politely, but wholly, as though each word was a coin he meant to keep. When she faltered, self-conscious, his eyes never wavered. "You think your life is small," he said. "But small things kept me alive last night." Mara looked at her hands, rough from rope and soil. No one had ever spoken of them like that. She muttered something about stew and busied herself with the pot. If she lingered on his words, she feared she would unravel. Dusk came again, and with it unease. The marsh was restless, whispering in ways Mara had never heard before. She set the lanterns early, every wick lit, every shadow pushed to corners. Lucian stood at the door, scanning the horizon like a sentinel. "They'll wait," he murmured. "They'll watch." Mara's heart skipped. "How long?" "Until weakness shows," he said. His hand flexed once against the frame. "Or until they believe they've found mine." She dared to step closer, brushing his sleeve with her fingertips. "And have they?" For a moment he didn't answer. His gaze dropped to where her hand lingered. When his voice came, it was low enough the marsh couldn't steal it. "They will if I let them." Mara pulled her hand back, heat crawling up her throat. She wasn't sure if his words were warning or confession. Perhaps both. Either way, the thought settled in her chest: if she was his weakness, she would not regret it. Night tested the mended door with cautious fingers. Wind searched the seams, rain counted the nails. Mara sat cross-legged on the floor, grinding marsh mint and feverfew into a paste, pretending she was preparing simples, not strategies. Lucian paced the 3 strides the cottage allowed, a caged weather system learning the map of smallness. "You're wasting strength," she murmured without looking up. "I'm spending it where it matters," he said. "On staying." The word glanced off her ribs and lodged. She rose, wiped her hands, and tied a strip of linen around the beam where his hook had buried a cousin. Little banners of victory, she told herself. "Your sister," she said at last. "She always command?" "She always consumes," he answered, more biography than insult. "She calls it order. You call it famine. I call it forgetting what doors are for." He stopped at the threshold and laid his palm against wood as if taking a pulse. "If they come, they'll test me, not the frame. They think a house is only wood." "They're wrong," Mara said, and set her palm beside his. Warmth threaded through the timber like a whispered reply. They stood that way longer than needed, each listening to a different heartbeat, until both heartbeats chose the same pace. At moonrise the marsh breathed fog, low, deliberate, a shawl drawn tight across standing water. Shapes moved within it, not kin, not men. Deer, perhaps. An owl changing its mind mid-flight. All the normal things that felt like blessings simply because they were ordinary. Lucian took the stool by the hearth and, awkwardly, adorably, tried to braid new twine for the bell rope he'd promised to rehang. His long fingers were made for tearing and closing, they found making a slower verb. Mara watched his frown deepen until laughter caught her with its own surprise. "Here," she said, stepping behind him, guiding his hands. "Let the cord do most of it. You don't strangle a thing you mean to strengthen." He listened, and the second braid behaved. "You were taught to rule," she said. "But not to tie." "I was taught that knots are for nets," he said. "And nets are for catching. Knots are for holding," she corrected, and tightened the finish with a bite of her teeth. When she tied the rope to the new bell, salvaged from a fisherman's wrecked skiff, he glanced up at the sound with a look that might pass for shy on a man who terrified cities. "It will ring for you," he said. "It will ring for us," she answered, and refused to be ashamed of the pronoun. They slept badly, and when Mara dreamed, she dreamed not of fangs or fire but of hands, her own, opening doors she'd once nailed shut. At dawn the fog lifted to show the valley road scarred with cart ruts and boot prints that turned back before the marsh, as if a rumor had set its own border. Lucian returned from scouting with rain in his hair and a narrow smile. "The villagers spoke of lights," he said. "Some will make offerings tonight. Bread. Salt. For you? For what they don't dare name. It's enough. He set a small bundle on the table. Wild pears, their skins browned with frost. A gift from a child brave enough to disobey a mother. You took fruit from a child? Mara teased. I traded, he said, mock stern. A promise for pears. What promise? That I would keep the path to school from swallowing her when the marsh is hungry. Mara's throat pinched. She pictured a little coat, a stubborn chin. You don't even know her name, she murmured. Names aren't required for vows. He split a pear with a nail's edge and offered her half. Sweetness shocked her mouth. It tasted like a world that could still choose gentleness. By noon the sky unlatched and spilled blue. Work, then, real, necessary, human work. They hauled driftwood and reseated the lintel, set a peg where the jamb had split. Lucian lifted beams with a care that argued with his reputation. Why leave your court? She asked over the rhythm of mallet and breath. Courts are rooms that forgot the door, he said. Someone needed to remember. So you left a kingdom to fix hinges. I left a hunger to practice thresholds. He straightened, a smear of resin across his wrist, and looked, really looked, at the cottage, the tidy clutter, the baskets, the patched window with its one stubborn ripple of glass. I have led armies, he said, almost to himself. This is harder. Because it asks you to stay, she said softly. He considered that, then nodded, not offended. They ate cold pie on the step and let the sun make strangers of them for an hour. A heron speared a frog in the shallows. The world took its necessary shapes. For the first time since he knocked, Mara felt a day that could be counted not by attacks survived but by tasks completed. The sensation was so foreign she had to put a name to it aloud. Living, she said. Yes, he answered, as if the word had always meant to. The first offering arrived at dusk. A loaf wrapped in a blue kerchief waited with a river stone. No footstep on the path, no shadow fleeing the reeds. Mara unknotted the cloth and sniffed, rye and fennel and the impertinent courage of valley wives. She tore off a heel, set it on a plate with salt, and carried both to the threshold. For whoever guards the line between, she said, as her grandmother had taught her in a winter when wolves came thin and bold. Lucian watched without interrupting ritual. When she returned, his gaze had gone distant with memory. Do your kind keep Sabbaths? She asked. We keep intervals, he said. Moments where we are required to remember our first promise. And what was yours? He folded the kerchief carefully and placed it where the bell's shadow fell. To leave more doors open than I closed. How's that going? Badly, he said, with such wry honesty she laughed. The bell rang, once, twice, no hand on the rope. Not warning, simply acknowledgement, like a nod from a neighbor you are learning to greet. Night returned with company. Not the sister, she was too cunning to spend herself in repetition. Scouts, then, thin men who smelled of iron mines and wet ash, hired wrists who'd take coin from any purse. They brought no silver, no songs, only hooks and lines and quiet greed. Lucian tasted them on the wind before Mara saw their shadows. Men, he said, and something like relief ghosted his mouth. Men can be turned. By fear? She asked. By wages, he answered, and stepped into the yard with his hands empty. The leader, a square-jawed boy dragging a man's fatigue behind him, halted when he understood who stood before him. Recognition isn't only for faces, sometimes it greets silhouettes. We're not here for you, the boy lied. We're taking the woman. The valley doesn't want witches. The valley wants bread, Lucian said, voice level. It wants its children delivered to school with dry socks. It wants floods to stop at the second fence. If you touch the keeper of that ledger, the column goes red. The boy's eyes flicked, calculating. Mara stepped forward and spoke in a language men understand most, the one that counts. 2 silver each to turn around, she said. A sack of grain after first frost if you don't talk. The boy's throat worked. Shame and hunger have always been cousins. He held out a hand without meeting her gaze. Lucian placed coin there from a purse Mara hadn't seen him carry. Your name? The boy asked, because men like to know what to call the stories that spared them. Threshold, Lucian said. Remember it when you're tempted to sell your mother's door. The men went. The knight exhaled. Mara shut the house with hands that shook not from fear, but from the unfamiliar luxury of choosing mercy and being allowed to keep it. The cottage slept fitfully, even with both of them inside. Mara dreamed of reeds bending like hands, of doors that never latched no matter how hard she pushed. When she startled awake, Lucian was standing at the window, still as carved obsidian, watching the marsh. You don't rest, she whispered. He didn't turn. Predators rarely do. You're not only predator. Her voice was raw from sleep. You came here broken. That pulled his eyes toward her. Crimson, dulled but steady. And you mended me. He crossed the room, lowered himself beside her, his weight sinking the straw mattress. But don't confuse healing with peace, Mara. They are not the same. She swallowed. Then what are we here in this house? His hand brushed her hair from her temple with surprising gentleness. We're something my kind can't name yet. That makes us dangerous. He leaned back, as if the thought itself had taken strength to say. Mara lay awake long after, the word dangerous turning in her like a key in a lock. The next days blurred into a rhythm. Work, food, mending. He chopped wood as if it were strategy. She stitched herbs into his cloak as if it were armor. At night, he told her fragments, not stories, never whole, but pieces of the years he carried. A winter siege where ice became both ally and enemy. A treaty broken with a single spilled cup of wine. A woman who once wore his crest like a jewel, and how she died for it. Mara listened with a heart both heavy and fascinated. She realized he wasn't boasting. He was confessing. One night, when he grew quiet too long, she asked, Do you regret them? The lives you've taken? His jaw tensed. Regret is too thin a word. I carry them. Every one. And some nights they carry me. Mara reached for his hand without thinking. He let her. His skin was colder than hers, but the grip steadied both of them. Then let me carry one with you, she whispered. His eyes softened, and though he said nothing, he didn't let go. The marsh was not finished with them. On the fourth night, the bell rang once. Not warning, not storm, but summons. Lucian was at the door before Mara could rise. He didn't open it. He listened. They're not kin, he murmured. Not hunters either. Something older. A low hum rolled through the reeds, deep enough to shake jars on shelves. Mara's breath itched. What is that? An arbiter, Lucian said grim. The marsh has called judgment. The door rattled as if pressed by no hand, only will. Shadows stretched, forming a figure without shape, a voice without mouth. Lucian of the Regent line. It thundered. You've broken the accord. You've bled where peace was promised. Lucian squared his shoulders, answering like a man before a throne. I bled because I was hunted. I defended a human because she opened her door when the world would not. The arbiter's gaze, cold as stone, turned toward Mara. And you, marshborn? Why shelter a shadow? Her throat closed. But she forced words out, steady despite the quake inside. Because no one else did. Because no one should have to beg for a door. Silence swelled, oppressive, waiting. Then the shadow inclined its head, slow as earth moving. Very well. Your threshold stands for now. And the figure dissolved like smoke. Lucian sagged against the frame. Mara exhaled, realizing her body had been holding its breath since the bell rang. The reprieve was fragile. Lucian admitted it that night. They'll test us again. The arbiter granted pause, not pardon. Mara stirred the stew, her hands trembling. Then we prepare. He studied her, crimson eyes burning softer now. Most would run. Most aren't me. She met his gaze squarely. I lived alone for 10 years, Lucian. I'm tired of running from shadows. If I fight and fall, at least I stood for something. He reached across the table and caught her wrist, his touch firm but not cruel. "Don't speak of falling," he said, voice low. "Not when I've just found reason to stand." Heat rushed to her cheeks, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she turned her hand in his and laced her fingers with his. "Then we stand together," she whispered. His grip tightened, not possessive, but sealing. "Together, then," he said, as if carving the word into stone. Dawn came sharp and clear, the marsh glistening with frost. For the first time in weeks, birdsong dared return. Mara stepped outside, boots crunching in the thin ice, and felt the sun warm her face. Behind her, Lucian stood in the doorway, a dark figure against the light. She realized he did not look like a monster then. He looked like something ancient that had chosen, for once, not to devour. "What will you do now?" she asked, watching breath plume white in the air. "Stay," he said simply. "Stay until staying becomes too dangerous." She turned, meeting his gaze. "And me?" His eyes softened. "You've already chosen. When you opened the door, you chose." She smiled faintly, though her heart thundered. "Then I'll keep choosing." He stepped into the frost, the marsh sighing under his boots, and came to stand beside her. Together, they faced the horizon. Whatever waited there, they would meet it, not as predator and prey, not as human and monster, but as something new. Something dangerous. Something theirs. The truce with daylight held, but night had learned their address. Before dusk, a crow hammered the lintel, 3 precise pecks, messenger's code from a war that never wrote letters. Lucian opened the door, palm up. The bird hopped to him, and dropped a sliver of bone into his hand, carved with a sigil like a broken crown. "Summons," he said. "Old law." Mara folded her arms to hide the shiver. "If you ignore it, then the law ignores limits." He set the bone on the table. The cottage's shadows seemed to lean away from it. "They want a parley at the salt flat. No reef, no reeds, no house to help us. So they chose ground without thresholds," Mara said, already packing salve and linen into her satchel. Lucian's eyebrow lifted. "You're coming. Your sister counted on me staying." Mara tied the satchel shut. "Let her miscount." He almost smiled. "Then we take a door with us." He took a narrow plank from the woodpile, an old shelf, smoothed by years of cups, and strapped it across his back with twine, absurd and solemn as a knight shouldering a banner. "If we can't stand on a threshold," he said, "we'll stand in one." The salt flat spread like broken glass under a sky too wide to be polite. Wind chased brine across cracked white. 3 figures waited: Lucian's sister, a thin man in a scholar's coat that fit him like a borrowed lie, and a priestess whose eyes were the color of kelp and verdicts. The sister's smile found Mara first. "You taught him tricks," she said, gaze flicking to the plank. "How sweet! How cautious!" Mara returned. "I've seen your kind confuse ground with permission." The scholar spoke as if paid per syllable. "The regent has contravened Clause 8 of the Nocturnal Compact. He harbored prey, he sheltered a person," Mara cut in. "He also prevented a culling," the priestess added, surprising all but herself. "My shrines record the night. I saw his hand turn hunters from doors with children behind them." The sister's smile cooled. "Piety seldom pays the butcher." Lucian planted the plank upright in the salt. For a moment wind forgot its job. He stepped astride it. Mara joined, shoulder to shoulder, 2 figures in a doorway drawn on the ground. "Speak your price," he said. "Your peace," the sister said. "Your crown." "I don't wear it." "Exactly," she purred. "Give me what you refuse to wield." "Bargains are maps of fear." The scholar unrolled parchment, his mouth moving as if the words might bite. "Article: the regent abdicates authority over the northern marsh and surrenders any claim to corridor roads, in perpetuity. In exchange, the house of Reed, the human house," Mara said, "remains unburned?" The priestess's gaze slid to her. "Terms must hold for those without fangs," she said, not kindly, only accurately. Wind lifted Lucian's hair, salt stung the bolt scar on his shoulder. If I abdicate, he murmured, she will gorge. The valley will feed her hunger until it forgets bread. So choose famine now for feast never, the sister teased. Be decisive. Mara touched the plank with 2 fingers, feeling the grain warm under sun. Compacts aren't cages, she said. They're bridges. Offer one. Lucian looked at her, then at his sister, and spoke in the tone of a bell that expects silence after it rings. No harvests. No hunts save defense. I will levy tithe, from us to them. Blood for flood, coin for grain, repairs for roofs. We fund the valley we tread. The scholar blinked. Tax the night? The priestess's mouth twitched, the ghost of a smile. The sister laughed outright. You want to make mercy a budget. Budgets bind better than chains, Mara said softly. They make consequence a calendar. The priestess nodded, interest brightening like a candle that had been waiting for a match. I will witness such a ledger, she said. The scholar, sensing momentum and coin, cleared his throat. If the tithe fails? Then thresholds close, Lucian said. And doors remember who slammed them. His sister tilted her head, something like calculation shadowing contempt. You would turn our name into an account book. I would turn our hunger into work, he said, meeting her gaze without venom. I am tired of being an appetite in a crown. Silence lapped at their ankles. Wind ran a thumb across the plank and approved of standing. The sister's eyes slid to Mara, weighing the quiet woman who kept speaking in nouns that didn't bleed. You did this, she said. Not accusation so much as diagnosis. I reminded him of doors, Mara replied. He already knew law. The sister looked at her brother like a childhood memory seen from a stranger's porch. Fine, she said at last, like a knife sheathing itself. Give the priestess her ledger. Tithe your nights. She leaned close enough that salt stung Mara's eyes. But remember, little keeper, if he fails, I collect debts with teeth. Parley ended without blood, a thing so unfamiliar the wind forgot to move for a heartbeat. The priestess drew a circle in the salt, cut her palm, and pressed it to the line. Lucian did the same. When she offered the blade to Mara, Mara shook her head. I bleed only for thresholds I own. Respect flickered in kelp eyes. Wisdom. The scholar, already composing rumors, demanded signatures with the squeak of quill. Lucian signed with a name older than his face. The letters looked like rivers choosing their beds. The sister signed for now, a flourish that said she intended to amend. When they turned to go, Mara tugged the plank free. Lucian steadied it, and they walked back across the flat like 2 travelers carrying a door to a house they had yet to build. On the ridge above the marsh he stopped, breath ghosting in the cooling air. You keep pulling me toward hard roads, he said. You keep choosing them, she answered. I only point. He angled the plank, and for a small, ridiculous moment, they made a frame for the sunset. Marsh turned copper, water turned mirror, and the cottage far off caught the light like a remembered kindness. Home, Mara said. For as long as we deserve it, he replied. The first tithe night felt like inventing a holiday and a burden at once. Lucian stood in the yard, cloak pinned with a plain iron nail instead of a crest, and called the ledger open. The priestess arrived barefoot, robes damp with marsh breath, carrying a book bound in eelskin. 3 valley families came with her, faces cautious but curious. Mara laid a table, bread, salt, broth that smelled of thyme. One by one, debts and promises were named. Lucian pledged labor to raise the broken fence along the north pasture. He promised a watch on the school path for 3 storms. He set coin aside for the miller's roof. No blood changed hands. The priestess wrote in strokes that sounded like oars. When it was done, the bell rang itself, once, the sound small and perfect. The villagers left offerings without meeting Lucian's gaze: apples, a spool of blue thread, a child's drawing of a door with a smiling sun over it. Mara tucked the drawing into a beam with care that made her throat ache. After the last lantern bobbed into the reeds, Lucian looked at her. We have made an enemy of ease, he said. Ease was never our friend. she answered, and he kissed her then, brief, reverent, as if sealing a compact only they could witness. The kiss didn't fix anything. Good kisses don't, they complicate beautifully. Morning brought problems that smelled like smoke. A shepherd stumbled from the road with news that burned. Someone had set torches to the western thatch, and hands wearing night had been seen laughing. Not kin, men hired hungry, reckless now that rumor said the region had been tamed by ledgers. Lucian's jaw tightened. My sister testing a side door. He took up the hook, almost fondly, and pressed it to Mara. Keep the house. You think I won't come? She said. I think I need you here if they come. She hated the rightness in that. Then bring our door with you, she said, nodding to the plank. He strapped it on without argument. When he ran, the marsh didn't slow him. Mara watched until he was a dark brushstroke against gold reeds, then turned to the house and listened with her whole body. The bell rope swayed, no wind. I hear you, she told the cottage. We'll hold. She set pots of water on to boil, lined the sill with jars of ash and salt, and wrote a single word on the inside of the threshold with chalk: return. Holding a house is work that looks like superstition, and is really engineering. Mara braced shutters with crossbars, wedged coins above lintels, smudged soot into the letter joints of her own name above the door until it felt like armor. Midday ripened toward trouble. 2 figures ghosted from the road, the scholar, had Askew with haste, and the priestess, calm as a shoreline. He asked us to keep the ledger present, the priestess said. Witness Dieter's wolves with titles. Mara let them in, grateful for voices that didn't ask for tea as a pretext for gossip. News? West fire contained, the scholar panted. Regent, persuasive. The priestess's mouth relaxed by a degree. He turned men without breaking them. That buys you tomorrow. And tonight? Mara asked. The priestess touched the chalk word with a fingertip. That depends what you've taught him about coming home. They spent the afternoon sewing sand into bags for the sill and converting a table into a barricade that could fold down in a breath. When the first star blinked, the bell rang twice. Not danger, distance. Mara exhaled. He was alive. She lit the lamp in the window, then blew it out and lit it again, a private semaphore that said here. 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 Lucian arrived after nightfall, smelling of smoke and wet wool and the relief of a bad story ending early. He leaned his forehead against Mara's for a beat too long to be polite, and not long enough to be remedy. They'll try again, he said. On a night with less wind. Then we make wind, she answered, which earned a tired laugh he didn't know he'd been saving. The priestess opened the eelskin book. There's more. A petition from the Valley Council. If the tide stands to first frost, they will recognize your wardenship of the marsh paths. The scholar tried to look like he wasn't moved by bureaucracy turning kind. Lucian took the pen. His hand didn't shake. Accepted, he said. With addendum, no child will pay toll for crossing water. He signed, and something old turned inside the house, the satisfaction of a hinge resettled on a true pin. Later, when the witnesses had gone, Mara pressed her palm to his ribs where scars wrote poems without rhyme. You'll break yourself on this, she whispered. Better this than on a crown, he said, and kissed her again, not brief this time, but careful, the way a craftsman sets a beam he means to build beneath. Winter scouted early, tossing frost ahead like spies. The marsh changed color, all pewter and pearl. Work thickened into ritual. Tithe nights, patrols, mending, soup. The sister did not vanish. Absence is a tactic. Sometimes Mara felt her like a cold thumb at the base of the skull when the wind came from the north. Sometimes a crow left carved bone on the lintel, a punctuation mark to an unfinished threat. But doors have grammar too. The bell learned the weight of friendly hands. Children dared the path to leave small, bold offerings, a button, a painted rock, a note that read simply, "Thank you, doorman." Lucian pinned the note by the drawing under the beam and stood looking at them as if they were medals he preferred to any medal. You kept me from choosing a war I know how to win, he said, not looking away. You chose one I don't. That's because this one ends with a house, Mara said, taking his hand. Outside, ice rhymed the reed tips. Inside, the hearth practiced spring. When sleep came, it came easy, and for the first time, Mara dreamed of a knock that did not frighten her, only announced friends. The door swung wide, and the night stayed on the porch like a guest with good manners. Winter pressed harder with each dawn. The marsh froze at its edges, a mirror for pale skies. Smoke curled from the chimney, carrying the scent of peat and thyme into the still air. Mara and Lucian worked side by side, silent more often than speaking, as though their words had been spent on treaties and now needed rest. Yet silence between them no longer felt like absence. It felt like the warmth of a fire that didn't need tending every second. One evening, as she set bowls of stew on the table, Lucian touched her wrist. "I have fought battles with 1,000 men at my back," he said. "None steadied me like this house with you inside." Her heart jolted. She didn't know what answer he wanted, or if he wanted one at all. So she only covered his hand with hers, letting the weight of her silence answer for her. His eyes softened in the lamplight, and for the first time, she wondered if eternity could fit into something as small as a cottage. The peace was fragile. Even as the valley accepted the tide and children laughed at the bell rope, Mara felt eyes in the trees. Lucian felt them too. His body was taut wire each time dusk came. One night, when the wind rattled the shutters like teeth, he said quietly, "My sister won't wait forever. She'll come when she thinks you're weakest." Mara kept her back to him, stirring herbs into the pot, though her hands trembled. "Then she doesn't know me at all." He almost smiled. "She'll try to turn you against me. She'll whisper what I've done, who I've killed, what I've been. Will you listen?" Mara set the spoon down and turned, her chin high though her chest thudded. "I'll listen. But I'll decide for myself." Lucian's gaze caught hers, fierce and searching, then softened with something she rarely saw in him: hope. "That is what frightens her most," he said. "That you would choose at all." Snow arrived like a long-awaited guest, softening the marsh with blankets of white. Mara shoveled paths to the woodpile while Lucian watched the horizon, a figure black against silver. At night they spoke of small things: how much would they need, whether the rabbits had taken shelter in the cellar. But always, beneath it, the question of how long their fragile treaty would last. One evening, while she patched his cloak, Lucian sat near the fire and said, almost to himself, "Do you ever regret opening the door?" Mara's hands stilled on the needle. She thought of blood on her floor, of hunters breaking wood, of kin shadows stretching across her hearth. She thought of the way his head had felt in her lap, heavy as stone but fragile as breath. "No," she said simply. He closed his eyes. Relief showed on his face like cracks in armor, and Mara realized how much weight that single word lifted from him. The sister came again in dreams before she came in flesh. Mara woke with sweat slick on her skin, her name whispered against her ear though no one stood near. She didn't tell Lucian at first. She didn't want to give the dream teeth. But by the third night she confessed it, and he listened with his jaw set hard. "She's probing," he said. "Trying to make you doubt me before she strikes." "Dreams can't kill," Mara said. "They can if you believe them," he countered. She shivered. "Then teach me how not to." He hesitated, then took her hands, his fingers cold but steady. "Remember thresholds. When you dream, picture the door. Picture it shut. And picture me standing in it." Mara nodded, clinging to the image. That night, when the whispers came, she imagined the door, solid wood, iron latch, and Lucian on the other side, unmovable. The voice scratched like claws on the outside, but it never entered. When she woke, she found Lucian already watching her, crimson eyes dimmed by exhaustion but proud. "You held," he said simply. She nodded. "We held." The thaw came later than anyone expected. The marsh cracked under the weight of ice, and the air smelled of wet earth again. Mara planted seeds in her garden, her hands raw from the cold soil. Lucian stood beside her, awkward in a task so ordinary it nearly felt foreign to him. "I once planted oaks for a citadel," he murmured, pushing soil over roots. They grew tall enough to block sieges. And yet, none of them fed anyone. Mara smiled faintly. Then this will be your first real planting. He glanced at her, something unspoken flickering in his gaze. Our planting, he corrected. Together, they finished the row. For a brief, precious moment, the world felt simple. Like survival could be measured in sprouts, and not in battles. But as dust bled across the sky, the bell rang 3 times. Not warning. Not summons. A promise. Lucian met Mara's eyes, his jaw tightening. She's coming, he said. And this time, she won't be alone. Mara brushed soil from her hands and rose to her feet. Then neither will you. The air thickened with tension even before the marsh went quiet. Crows fled west, a black smear against the violet sky. Lucian set the iron latch on the door with deliberate care, then turned to Mara. When she comes, she'll try to break you first. That's how she wins. She fractures faith. Mara's pulse raced, but her voice held steady. Then she underestimates me. He studied her, crimson eyes unreadable, then nodded once. Stand where the firelight reaches you. If shadows stretch, don't step into them. Mara tightened her shawl, fingers brushing the knife she'd hidden at her waist. And you? I'll stand where I've always stood. His voice was quiet thunder. Between you and her. The bell rang once. Then again. A third time, long and low, like a warning from the marsh itself. Lucian's hand closed on the plank they had carried to the salt flats. He planted it in the floor like a flag. Mara moved beside him, shoulder to shoulder. Threshold, he said. Sovereign, she answered. Together, they faced the night. The door didn't break. It dissolved. Wood curled into smoke, hinges shrieked, and the marsh spilled in with her, Lucian's sister, draped in frost-dark silk, her mouth a perfect wound of a smile. Shadows followed her, a dozen shapes with red eyes glowing faintly, hungry but patient. She clapped her hands once, a sound like glass shattering. Brother! Keeper! Her gaze slid to Mara, curious, predatory. You've made yourself a story in the valley. Bread at doors, coins in ledgers. Tell me, does the human think that makes you less a monster? Mara's heart hammered, but she met those gleaming eyes. He doesn't need to be less. He only needs to be different from you. The sister's smile sharpened. Ah. She believes she has reformed the wolf. Her gaze cut to Lucian. Tell her the truth. Tell her what you did in the ashen years. Tell her how you crowned yourself in blood. Lucian's jaw locked, silence coiling tight in his chest. Mara reached for his hand. He doesn't need to tell me, she said. I already chose him. The sister's laughter cracked through the cottage like a whip. So blind. So foolish. You mistake pity for love. She gestured, and her kin stepped forward, claws gleaming. Lucian's body became the storm Mara knew, fast, precise, merciless. But even as he struck, his wound from winter pulled at him, blood seeping dark into linen. Mara seized the iron poker, planting herself at his flank. When one kin lunged past, she swung with all her weight. The strike rang like a bell, iron singing against bone. The creature stumbled, and Lucian finished it with a blur of claws. Stay behind me, he growled. Mara's throat burned. I said I wouldn't run. The sister's eyes flared crimson. Then you will die beside him. She lifted her hand, and the shadows thickened, wrapping the cottage like black water. Mara's breath caught, but she remembered his words, picture the door. She closed her eyes and saw it, wood iron, her hand on the latch. When she opened them, the light in her chest flared. The shadows recoiled, just for a heartbeat. Lucian glanced at her, shock flashing across his face. She steadied herself. Threshold, she whispered. The battle turned into rhythm, iron claw light. Each time Mara's strength wavered, Lucian braced her. Each time his knees buckled, she lifted her light. The cottage itself seemed to hold its breath, boards creaking with strain but refusing to splinter. The sisters' kin fell, one after another, dissolving to ash that stank of sulfur and wet earth. But for each that fell, more pressed in, endless as tide. Mara's arms trembled, her visions swam. "We can't hold forever," she gasped. Lucian snarled, striking another down. "Then we don't. We end it." He turned to his sister, his eyes blazing crimson fire. "No more games," he said. "This ends with us." The sister tilted her head, smile sharp as broken glass. "Then come, brother. Show me what mercy costs." She lifted both hands, shadows condensing into blades of pure night. Lucian stepped forward, but Mara caught his arm. "Not alone." He hesitated, then nodded once. Together they crossed the threshold. The marsh became battlefield. Frost cracked underfoot, reeds whipped like whips in storm winds conjured by their power. Lucian and his sister clashed, fangs, claws, shadows like spears. Each strike sent shockwaves through the ground. Mara stayed close, her light flashing in bursts, knocking shadows aside when they lunged for him. The sister sneered, voice sharp even in combat. "You weaken yourself with her," she taunted. Lucian's claws raked sparks across her shoulder. "No," he growled. "She makes me stronger." Mara thrust her palms outward, light exploding brighter than ever. Shadows shrieked, burning into ash. The sister faltered for half a breath, and in that moment, Lucian struck, slamming her into the frozen marsh. She hissed, blood dark against white ice, and glared up at them both. "This isn't over," she spat. "You've chained yourself to her. And chains always break." Mara's chest heaved, her arms aching, but she stood tall beside him. "Then let it break me," she said fiercely. "Not him." The sister's laughter faded into the reeds as her form dissolved into mist. The remaining kin scattered like smoke. Silence fell, heavy and raw. Lucian turned to Mara, his chest rising and falling with exhaustion, crimson eyes dimming. "You've bound yourself to me," he whispered. She reached for his hand, steady despite her shaking. "I already did the night I opened the door." They returned to the cottage as if walking out of a storm and into a held breath. Inside, the lamp still burned, steady as a vow that had waited without wavering. Lucian leaned his shoulder to the doorpost and let his eyes close for a heartbeat, the act as intimate as baring a throat. Mara pressed her palm to his sternum, feeling the wild clatter there slowed by degrees. "Sit," she said, and the regent obeyed like a man who had finally found an order he trusted. She cleaned him with water gone pink, replaced linen with fresh, and stitched where skin resisted knitting. He didn't flinch. When she finished, he caught her wrist and turned her hand over. Her fingers were raw, one knuckle split where iron had sung against bone. He lifted her knuckles to his mouth and touched them with a kiss as solemn as a seal. "You stood," he murmured. She huffed a breath that wanted to be a laugh. "We stood." Outside, the marsh reconsidered frog song. The bell rope moved once without ringing, an almost sound, the house's way of exhaling. They ate stew too salty from her shaking hand and called it good. Later, when sleep prowled the edges of the room, he lay on the rug and she on the bed, the space between them a door left intentionally ajar. Either crossed it. Yet both knew the threshold by heart. Morning brought a bruise-colored sky and visitors who had never dared knock before. 3 valley wives in shawls, a miller with flour ghosting his beard, the child with the stubborn chin, and the painted rock. They came to the threshold, each carrying something small, cheese, a coil of blue thread, a sprig of wintergreen. They did not ask to enter, they asked to speak. Mara stood with hands still bandaged and listened as if harvesting rain. "We heard the night," the eldest wife said. "Doors rattled. Lamps burned with no oil." The miller cleared his throat. "Rumor says the regent kept the path clear of fire." Lucian stepped into the doorway with no cloak, no crown, only the plain pin of an iron nail. The child's eyes went wide, fear and delight dancing. "Are you the doorman?" she asked. His mouth tipped. "I try to be." The wives exchanged looks that weighed bread, not legends. "Then we'll bring flour when the sack's full," one said. And if you ring that bell fast 3 times, we'll run with buckets and poles. It wasn't fealty. It was neighborliness. The rarer pledge. Mara felt something unspool in her chest, a tension older than winter. When the visitors left, the child lingered, pressed a folded paper into Mara's palm, and whispered, "For when you're scared." Inside, the page was a crayon door with a smiling sun and the word open written in a brave, wobbling hand. By noon the priestess arrived, eelskin ledger under one arm, the scholar trotting behind with ink-stained fingers and the look of a man trying to catch his own breath. "The tithe holds," she said before either of them could ask. "But holding it will cost you." She set the book on the table and turned to Mara with a gaze that felt like tide, cool, relentless, honest. "The power you used last night, where did you learn it?" "I didn't," Mara said, cheeks warming. "It learned me." Lucian's glance flicked to her, tender worry sharpened by curiosity. The priestess drew a small blade and a clay bowl from her sleeve. "May I?" Mara nodded and held out her forearm. The cut was shallow, the drop of blood bright. The priestess tipped it into water, murmured a word that smelled like fennel and flint, and watched the surface. Light threaded the bowl as if the drop remembered sunlight. "Threshold born," she said at last. "Some few are. Houses make them when a door keeps out death long enough to turn fear into law. Your grandmother, did she sit vigil in a hard winter?" Mara's throat pinched. "She did. Wolves took the cattle. Not us. She named the lintel with salt." The priestess added softly, not a question. "You inherited a grammar keeper. Your light is the old language of doors." The scholar was already scribbling. "So the human is a sigillist," he breathed. "Not a witch, an architect. A sovereign," Lucian said the word low, as if kneeling to it. Afternoon melted into gold. They rehung the bell with the cord Lucian had clumsily braided and Mara had taught into obeying. He pulled once. The sound rang clean and far, bouncing off reed and water like a promise that had found legs. "Your sister won't accept the ledger," Mara said, tying the last knot. "She'll test the tithe. She'll send men without crests, kin without names." Lucian nodded, eyes on the horizon where the marsh met sky with the indifference of giants. "Then we make the habit of standing louder than the spectacle of attack." He fetched a plank, their carried threshold, and set it just inside the door, not planted like a banner this time but laid across sawhorses, its face blank. "Right," he said. "Not charms. Instructions." Mara hesitated only a breath. She dipped a brush and wrote in careful strokes the rules that had once been only instinct. Knock before entering. Name yourself. Bring nothing burning. Leave with what you brought. Cross with clean intent. When she finished, the plank felt warmer, as if the words had woken a sleeping board into a beam. The priestess touched each line with 2 fingers and nodded. "We'll copy this for the school," she said. "Children learn quicker than councils." At dusk, the child returned with friends, read the rules aloud, and giggled at clean intent like it might be a game. Perhaps it could be. Night gathered again, but it came differently, less like a siege engine, more like a watchful animal deciding whether to approach a hand. Lucian stood in the doorway, the houses light at his back and the marshes dark in his eyes. "I keep thinking of crowns," he said, not moving. "How we build them out of hunger! How easy it is to forget heads aren't meant to carry weight forever." Mara joined him, shoulder touching cloaked shoulder. "Then put it down," she said. "Where the nail?" He exhaled, half laugh, half leaving behind. "I would if not for her." "Your sister?" "My old self," he admitted. For a long, quiet time they watched the reeds, listening for the wrong kind of rustle and hearing only owls. When the bell stirred without ringing, the house's almost breath, Mara laced her fingers with his. "If she comes," she said, "we'll answer. If the arbiter calls, we'll stand. If the valley falters, we'll pay. And if the door breaks—" She paused, feeling the rightness of the last line before she spoke it. "We'll build another. Together." Lucian turned his hand in hers and kissed her knuckles where the skin had split and healed. Together, he echoed, and the word carried out over water as if the marsh had been waiting for it since the first hinge turned. Somewhere far off, a wolf howled without hunger in it. The night, for once, chose to pass by like a courteous guest. Spring crept in quietly, softening the marsh with shoots of green and a chorus of frogs. The cottage, scarred by storms and battles, stood straighter than it had in years, as though it too had chosen survival. Mara knelt by the garden, her fingers black with soil, while Lucian split wood in the yard. For once, the air did not carry dread but the ordinary scent of thaw and hearth smoke. When she looked up, he was watching her, no crown, no shadow, only a man leaning on an axe as if the sight of her rooted him stronger than oak. She rose, brushing dirt from her hands, and walked to him. They stood at the threshold together, gazing out at the path that led to both danger and promise. "Do you think she'll come back?" Mara asked quietly. Lucian's crimson eyes softened, no longer a storm but an ember. "Yes. Night never forgets. But we'll be ready." He reached for her hand, and she let him take it, her fingers warm against his cold. The bell stirred in the breeze, not in warning this time but in greeting. For the first time, Mara believed it. Whatever came, crowns, kin, storms, or silence, they would answer it together. And the door, their door, would always open first to them.